Good afternoon, Year 5. I hope you're okay and enjoying this another lovely day that we're having. Amazing. It always makes me feel so much happier when the sun's out, so I hope you feel the same too. So today we are going to be reading the rest of chapter 6 of The Indian in the Cupboard, and we left off at the beginning of page 71, so we're going to do that all the way through to page 80, where chapter 7 starts. So hope you're sitting comfortably, nice and relaxed, and off we go. Sewing had always bored him rigid, but now he sat for half an hour stitching away without even looking up. He was trying to achieve the patched look of a real teepee made of an odd-shaped pieces of hide, and he also found a way of bracing the sticks so they didn't have to fold up every time they were nudged. "Very good, Omri," remarked his teacher several times. "What patience all of a sudden." Omri, who usually liked praise as much as anyone, hardly heard her. He was concentrating so hard. After a long time, he became aware that Patrick was standing over him, breathing through his nose rather noisily to attract his attention. "Is that for my Indian?" "My Indian, yes." "Why are you doing it in bits like that?" "To be like a real one." "Real ones have designs on." "So will this. He's going to paint proper Iroquois ones." "Who is?" "Little Bull, that's his name." "Why not call him Running Nose?" said Patrick, with Omri looking up at him blankly. "Because his name's Little Bull," he said. Patrick stopped grinning. He frowned. "I wish you stopped this stupid business," he said peevishly, going on as if it weren't a joke. Omri went on looking at him for a moment and then went back to his bracing. Each pair of sticks had to have another short stick glued between them with Airfix glue. It was quite tricky. Patrick stood a minute and then said, "Can I come home with you today?" "No, I'm sorry." "Why not?" "Mum's having guests," Omri mumbled. He didn't tell lies very well, and Patrick knew at once it was a lie and it was hurt. "Oh, all right then, be like that," he said, and stalked off furiously. The afternoon ended at last. Omri accomplished the walk home, which with normal dawdling took half an hour, in a little over 10 minutes. He arrived sorely out of breath and greeted his surprised mother. "Have you developed a jet engine, or have you just been expelled?" with a lot of gasping and a request to eat tea in his room. "What have you been up to up there? There's an awful mess on the floor, looks like bits of grass and bark. And where did you get that beautiful little Indian teepee? I think it's made of real leather." Omri looked at her speechless. He began at last. Telling lies to Patrick was one thing. Lying to his mother was quite something else. And he never did it unless it was emergency, was dire. But mercifully the phone rang just then, so he was spared, for the moment. He dashed upstairs. There was indeed a fair old mess, though no worse than he often left himself when he had been working on something. Little Bull and the pony were nowhere to be seen, but Omri guessed where to look, behind the dressing-up crate. A wonderful sight met his eyes. A longhouse, not quite finished, but no less interesting and beautiful for that, stood on the seed box, whose smooth surface was now much trampled over. There were hoof as well as moccasin prints. Omri saw that a ramp made of part of the bark had been laid against the wooden side of the box, up which the pony had been led. To Omri's delight, odd as it may seem, a tiny pile of horse manure laid on the ramp as proof of the pony's passing. And there it was, tied by a thread to an upright twig hammer, presumably into the ground, munching a pile of grass, which the Indian had carried up for him. Little Bull himself was still working, so intently that he did not even notice that he was not alone. Omri watched him in utter fascination. The longhouse was about half finished, The twigs, which had been pliant ones taken from the weeping willow on the lawn, had been stripped of their bark, leaving them shiny white. Each one had been bent into an arch, the ends thrust into the earth and cross pieces lashed to the sides with thread. More and more twigs, which were stout poles to the Indian, had been added, which never a nail or screw needed to strengthen the structure, and now Little Bull had begun to fix flakes of bark like tiny tiles onto the cross pieces. He was seated onto the roof itself, his feet locked round the main roof pole, which ran the length of the house, hanging these bark tiles, each of which he would fix carefully, shaped with his knife. The knight's battle-axe lay on the ground beside an unused pile of twigs. They had clearly been used to chop and strip them, and been made to serve Little Bull's purpose very well. At last, Omri saw him straighten up, stretch his arm towards the ceiling, and open his mouth in a tremendous noisy yawn. "Tired?" he asked him. Little Bull got such a fright he almost fell off the longhouse roof, and the pony neighed and tugged at his rope. But then Little Bull looked up and saw Omri hanging over the crate far above him and grinned. "Little Bull tired, work many hour. Look, make longhouse. Work for many braves, I make alone. Also not good tools. Axe Omri give heavy. Why no tomahawk?" Omri was getting used to his Indian's ungrateful ways, and was not offended. He showed him the teepee he made. "I suppose you won't want this now you've got the longhouse," he said rather sadly. Want! He seemed to have decided teepees had their uses after all. He circled it. "Good! Give paints. Make pictures." Omri unearthed his poster paints. When he came back with them, he found Little Bull sitting cross-legged on the earth, facing the figure of the chief which Omri had put next to the teepee. Little Bull was clearly puzzled. "Totem?" he asked. "No, it's plastic." "Plastic?" "Yes, I bought it in a shop." Little Bull stared at the figure with its big feather headdress. "You make magic. Get bow and arrows from plastic." "Yes." "Also, make feathers real?" he asked, with a gleam in his eye. "You like that headdress?" Little Bull like, but that for chief. Little Bull not chief till father die. Little Bull wear fathers of chief now, spirits angry. "But you could just try it on." Little Bull looked doubtful, but he nodded. "Make real, then see." Omri shut the Indian chief into the cupboard. Before he turned the key, he leant down to where Little Bull was examining the, to him, enormous pots of paint. "Little Bull, are you lonely?" "Huh? Would you like a friend?" "Got friends," said Indian, jerking his head towards the pony. "I meant another Indian." Little Bull looked up swiftly, his hands still. There was a long silence. "Wife?" he asked at last. "No, it's a man," said Omri. "The chief." "Not one," said Little Bull immediately, and went back to his work with a bent head. Omri was disappointed. He had thought it might have been fun to have two Indians, but somehow he couldn't do anything Little Bull wanted. He would have to treat his chief as he had treated the knight, grab the weapons and turn him into plastic again at once. Only this time it wasn't quite so easy. When he opened the cupboard, the chief was sitting on the shelf, looking about him in bewilderment, blinking as the light struck his eyes. Omri saw at once that he was a very old man, covered in wrinkles. He took the bow out of his hands quite easily, but the quivering of arrows was hung around him and a leather thong, and as for actually lifting the feathers headdress of this grey old head, Omri found that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. It seemed so rude. The old man gazed up at him, blankly at first, and then with dawning terror. But he didn't get up, and he didn't speak, though Omri saw his lips moving and noticed he had hardly any teeth. Omri somehow felt he should offer the old chief some friendly word to reassure him. So he held up one hand, as white men sometimes did in films when they were treating Indian chiefs with politeness, and said, "How?" The old Indian lifted a trembling hand, and suddenly he slumped onto his side. Little Bull, quick, get on my hand." Omri reached down, and Little Bull climbed onto his hand from the longhouse roof. "What?" "The old Indian, I think he's fainted." He carried Little Bull to the cupboard, and Little Bull stepped off onto the shelf. He stooped beside the crumpled figure, taking the single feather out of the back of his own headband he had held in front of the old man's mouth. Then he shook his head. "Dead," he said. "No breath. Heart stop, old man, gone to ancestors. Very happy." Without more ado, he began to strip the body, taking the headdress, the owls, and the big, richly decorated cloak for measure. Omri was shocked. "Little Bull, stop! Surely you shouldn't." "Chief dead. I only other Indian here. No one else to be chief. Little Bull chief now," he said, whirling the cloak around his bare shoulders and clapping the splendid circle of feathers onto his head with a flourish. He picked up the quiver. "Omri, give bow," he commanded, and it was a command. Omri obeyed it without even thinking. "Now you make magic. Deer for Little Bull hunt. Fire for cook. Good meat." He folded his arms, scowling at Omri. Omri was quite taken back by all of this. While giving Little Bull every respect as a person, he was not about to be turned into a slave. He began to wonder if giving him those weapons, let alone making himself into a chief, was such a good idea. "Now look here, Little Bull," he began in a teacherish tone. "Omri!" It was his father's voice, fairly roaring at him from the foot of the stairs. Omri jumped, bumping the cupboard. Little Bull fell over backwards, considerably spoiling his dignity. "Yes?" "Come down here, this instant." Omri had no time for courtesies. He snatched Little Bull up, set him down on his half-finished longhouse, shut and locked the cupboard door, and ran downstairs. His father was waiting for him. "Omri, have you been in the greenhouse lately?" And did you, while you were there, remove a seed tray planted out with marrow seeds, may I ask?" "Well, yes or no?" "Well, yeah, but..." "And it is possible that in addition you have been hacking at the trunk of the birch and torn off strips of the bark." "But Dad, it was only..." "Don't you know trees can die if you strip too much of their bark off? It's like their skin. As for the seed tray, that is mine. You have no business taking things from the greenhouse, and you know it. Now I want it back, and you better not have disturbed the seeds, or heaven help you." Omri swallowed hard. He and his father stared at each other. "I can't give it back," he said at last, "but I'll buy you another tray and some more seeds." "I've got enough money, please." Omri's father had a quick temper, especially about anything concerning the garden, but he was not unreasonable, and above all, he was not the sort to pry into his children's secrets. He realised at once that his seed tray, as a seed tray, was lost to him forever, and that it was no use to hectoring Omri about it. "All right," he said. "You can go to the hardware shop, and you can buy them, but I want them today." Omri's face fell. "Today? But it's nearly 5 o'clock now." "Precisely. Be off." Okay. That was a big part of the chapter, Year 5, so thank you for listening. So next time I read with you, it will be chapter 7 on page 81, and I really look forward to reading some more with you. I'm really enjoying this book so far. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon, Year 5. Bye.